I'm Caitlin Huxley, and this is The Art of Campaigns, where I talk election strategy with industry experts. Today I'm talking to Josef Lentsch, who's the founder of Partisan, a community for political pros in Europe. He also hosted the first political tech summit in Germany this last year that I attended and thought that was pretty spectacular. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Caitlin. Good to be here.
I moved to Europe a little over a year ago. And when I talk to other Americans, it's pretty clear that we don't quite grasp what's going on in Europe. So I'd love to get your thoughts on some things that U.S. political pros might misunderstand or get wrong about how elections work in Europe. There's European elections, and then each individual EU member state has its own election.
Exactly. So there is not one Europe and not one European system, apart, of course, as you said, the European elections, but there are many systems that are far more different to each other. You can talk about the French elections, you can talk about German elections, but they have very different systems. They're actually, in fact, very different kind of democracies.
Yeah, so there's actually three different systems, right? There's the European election zone, and then there's the Eurozone, and then there's the Schengen zone, which allows folks to travel around in Europe, even though not all of those people are in the EU proper.
Yeah, this is the attempt to keep a coherent European Union and try to move ahead while acknowledging that there are different issues in different countries. Some of the countries wanted the euro as a currency. Others said no. So it is an imperfect attempt to try to accommodate different people across 27 or even more nations. These days, we have to say it is working out comparably well.
Okay. And so as a US political pro who is now living in Europe, what's your recommendation for me for getting started? Do I just, like I did back in the US when I was 21, just start showing up to local party things and work my way back up?
Yeah, I guess, of course, if you're now a French citizen and living in France, I guess it is absolutely advisable to get to know the local scene. So absolutely do that. However, I think it also makes sense to engage with the pan-European networks, for example, that are organized in Brussels, are again a kind of a special construct that they have member parties, the Liberals, the Greens, the Social Democrats, the Conservatives, and they organize themselves. They also have their own party conferences each year.
One thing I noticed here is, and maybe it's because of the parliamentary type election, there's a lot more parties. In the US, we have pretty much two parties.
Yeah, I mean, I come from Austria, and I helped found a political party in Austria, which is called NEOS, which is a centrist liberal political party. In Austria alone, there have been 1,000 parties
Oh
that
my
have been
God.
founded, since the Second World War. In a way, it's a let a thousand flowers bloom, right? It's very different to a majoritarian system like a first past the post system. Of course, UK has more kind of has a majoritarian system, but most European countries, as you say, there are 5, 6, 7, or in the Netherlands, for example, it might be 15 or 20 parties in the parliament because they basically have no threshold. Each system has its advantages and disadvantages, of course. So there is no country like another. There in every country there is basically probably some conservative party and some sort of democratic party, and as you say, right, there are many Greens, many Liberals, and then some more and more also right-wing extremist parties. So I think my suggestion would be to really dive into one particular country, whether it might be France or Germany or Poland or whatever it might be, and really try to understand the intricacies of the system. And then the other thing, of course, is to look on the European level where there's an aggregation of those parties in the European Parliament, and try to make sense how those kind of different parties then still find ways to organize themselves into groups, and then build a working parliament, which really is something pretty unique.
Okay. Interesting. In the US, there is just tons of money. And obviously we've unshackled the amount of money that could go into politics, even on the local level, and our campaigns are getting more and more expensive every year. But it also means that, salaries for political professionals are going up with them. I guess the real question here is, where's the money? Right? Like, there's a lot of things that need to happen for elections to really run properly, in my opinion, as an American.
Yeah, I mean, in Europe, as you say correctly, there is less money in the political system, and of course, it's debatable
Yeah.
whether it's a good or a bad thing. I think you could argue the case that there's too much money in the U.S. political system, and that private money is too important. In Europe, of course, the decision has been to balance it more towards public monies, and in some countries, actually, it's not to say it's lavish, but it's quite a lot. Each country has taken, a
I
little bit of
see.
a different path. Once you campaign, there are separate pots of cash. If you run and if you go, for example, above a certain threshold, even if you do not enter parliaments, you get your money back to make sure that, you don't indebt yourself just because you campaign. I think, again, different solutions, different strokes for different folks. And I think you could argue perhaps that in some countries it might be good to allow for more cash or more money to enter the political system, to allow for better campaigning, better tools, better paid staff. But it's different from country to country. I don't think there's a one size fits all.
You said some places you get your money back, or there's money from the government for a number of parties. Can all of those parties then participate in the election? You could start your own little party, get a little bit of money, and use that to influence one of the bigger races.
In Germany, for example, you have to get a certain amount of signatures, for example, and that's the same in
Hmm.
Austria, to actually be able to run. So you need to show some public support. You cannot just say I'm running. And of course, in contrast to the United States, yes, there are quite a lot of smaller parties, as you said, some of them single issue, some of them, with a quite narrow menu of policies. There's the Animal Rights Party, for example, in the Netherlands. There's the Pensioners Party. There are also some ethnically rooted parties. So there's the Swedish Minority Party in Finland, which
Mm.
regularly gets 4%, and which we exist on those 4%, because those are the 4% of Swedes, of Swedes in Finland. They exist, they are successful, they have an impact, they have the constituency, and that's the difference between, of course, a PR system and a FPTP system like in the UK or in the US.
Hmm.
And a lot has been written about the Netherlandization, the Dutchification of politics, because what we can see in Europe right now is that, of course, systems get more and more diversified. Some say fragmented. I think it's a sign of our times that we become an ever more diverse society, which of course means for Europe that you rarely see one party with an absolute majority these days. You see more and more, like in Germany or in Austria right now, you see more and more three-way coalitions. I think this is the way we're headed. I don't think we will be able to go back, and probably don't want to go back to the times where just one party had the say for whatever it was, 4 or 5 years. I think one of the interesting stories in the last German election was the resurgence of the left. The left in Germany is the successor party of the SED, so it's the old German Democratic Republic Party, and it has survived over the last 30 years, but it was seen as on the way out. Some of the old guard decided to throw their hat into the ring again. And then they had an also quite popular front runner, Heidi Reicheneck, who actually had a really, really good digital game. So she performed very well on TikTok. And she channeled a lot of the fury that there's in the population in many countries. I mean, if you look at the US, of course, you can
Mm.
see that very well. But if you look at France and if you look at Germany, you can see that just as much. And so she tapped into this reservoir of anger. And channeled that towards their policies of distribution of wealth, more affordable housing, and they also had tools like a calculator for, whether you're actually being ripped off when it comes to your rent. So they had those kinds of digital service tools for the citizens, together with a very, very strong ground game. So they did canvassing, they mobilized the shit out of everything, and then they actually came back stronger. And re-entered parliament, to the surprise of many. In a big country like Germany, when you get the mix right between
Mm,
a digital game, ground game, the lead candidates that connects with the constituency, the party elite really kind of getting behind, trying to make everything work. So just from a technical point of view, not judging, of course, the policies and so on, but just from a technical point of view, I think this was a very interesting case study.
okay, interesting. But how is this being done with budgets as small as they are? Like, are obviously people are having to get creative.
Yeah, I think a lot of those innovations, I mean, that they tend to emerge in the US, where there is the most money, and so a lot of the new ideas and the new tools and new solutions emerge first there, and then often, of course, the UK is kind of a segue to
Mm,
Europe, and things get adopted. So, for example, what we saw at the Political Tech Summit, and that if a particular party, like for example Labour in the progressive camp, has a success, then now other parties are looking to who are their providers, who are the vendors,
mm,
and what are the tools, what's the tech stack that they used, and is this something we can work with? Now, in the past, the obvious barrier to such an adoption often would have been the language, right? I mean, don't forget
mm,
the many languages that Europe speaks. So it's
yeah.
not that everyone speaks English, particularly if you go below the subnational level in politics. You have to use the national language. Now, of course, with AI,
Mm,
this is becoming less and less of a hurdle. So, which is one of the reasons we're seeing now the emergence of a kind of a real market, a European market. What's the best solution, the best provider that helps me, win elections or communicate
mm,
or whatever it might be. And this is one of the reasons we've organized the Political Tech Summit for the first time, because we see that there's more and more interest in learning who's and what's out there. And there were many aha moments saying, wow, I didn't know that existed, and that's exactly what I've been looking for. Also, of course, for US consultants and providers and vendors who may have said in the past, wow, Europe is really super complicated, and so much regulation, and so many small countries. The markets, that it doesn't stand for expanding and rolling out and investing. But I think Europe is getting more and more interesting right now.
I think I wrote a post about this after the tech summit. But one of the vendors that I came across at the tech summit was called Common. It's with a Q. So, Common has this nation builder style model where you put your voter file into it, and then you start marking people as you interact with them and start mapping out those communities. And so it was able to be the American style walk app. And I thought this was really interesting because as you talk to folks in Europe, there really is a low tolerance for that American style political campaigning. My wife is French, and that's why I'm living in France. And so when she came over to the US and learned what I did and started learning about what I do, she learned that we call people at home and we go to their house and we knock on their door and we like aggressively talk to them about politics. She was taken aback. She thought it wasn't real. Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone open the door or answer the phone? Or why would anyone give money to a political campaign? These things are crazy to her. When talking to Common, they were saying that there's increasing over the last couple cycles, the amount of appetite for going door to door. As people are learning that it works, it's being adopted a little bit more, and they're seeing people do it. I wonder if you have an insight on something that Europe is missing, the advancement of technology
Mm.
that you think is going to change the way we do politics in Europe or in the world as a whole.
I think you point out rightly that the data regime, also the constitutional data regime, is very different in the US compared to Europe, right? The parties would have their voter files, basically, which is their the members' data, and of course, parties are stronger, better organized, more coherent than, for example, a US party would be. So yes, this transparency of what your political opinion is, what your stance is, and also, of course, all the data attached to it that you have in the US that you can buy, that doesn't exist in Europe. In that sense, it's a much more private environment when it comes to politics. So this, of course, means that, I mean, you get some data, but it's not close to what you can get in the US. So the consequence is that as a party, you need to organize most of the data yourselves, right? So you, of course, you have your members' data, and you can work with that. This kind of door knocking, canvassing, really kind of getting in conversations with people on the streets and elsewhere. I think we see a culture change there. It's not the same in every country. I think the notion of relational organizing
Mm.
is something, and again, with all differences compared to the States, in Europe, you wouldn't dare think of pay those people to organize their friends and contact their family and so on, right? I mean, that's in Europe, this would be a super strange notion. But the basic idea that you get people to contact their social circles and immediate vicinity socially, and then try to get them to mobilize them to get out the vote, or even convince them sometimes. This is something that is underutilized in Europe.
I take a lot of calls with vendors and with political firms, and learn about the new tech that's coming on. And something I recently came across, Upvote, it's called. You download the app as an individual user, and it will connect your contacts, which contacts are in your phone already, to those people who are eligible to vote, who are targeted voters in the race for the campaign that you're looking to volunteer for. And it gives you sample things to send them. And it really is that sort of relational organizing that you were talking about being underutilized. I thought it was really interesting. Actually, my first thought is, obviously I upload the voter file, and then it checks against the voter file. And, in somewhere like France, as a nationwide, it's not going to be a big issue to say, that pretty much anyone in your contacts who's in France is an eligible voter. But in a more regional race, I wonder, with limited access to the voter file because of the data protection that we have over here, how do you get around that?
Well, I think the one thing that, of course, makes all this unproblematic in Europe is if you get people to actually say yes,
To
to
opt in.
accept, to opt in. If you can get them to opt in, I mean, you can do basically, all the
Yeah,
things you
but that's
want.
the problem, getting people
But
to
that's the problem,
actually
right?
say, yes, you can send me things without me sending them things to say, can I send you stuff? It's like
I,
a
I,
loop.
Yeah, exactly. Ultimately, there is no easy fix for this, because this
Mm,
is just where Europe differs from the States. And it's not about the tools, but it's simply about the culture of how you deal with data, how
mm,
create user journeys for your members, for your activists, how you keep data fresh. I mean, that's a big challenge in many, many places, that there's no real understanding how important it is to have your, whatever it might be, member, user, voter data really, really up to scratch.
mm.
And I think then you can have the best tool of the world, right? I mean, if it's crap in, it's crap out. You can have the best, you can have the best tool in the world if you don't know how to wield it, if you don't know how to
Mm,
utilize it. But then it's not because of the GDPR that those tools are not
yeah.
being fully utilized. It's a problem of the users and of the people who are responsible. I think data and embedding tools in the organization, this kind of culture and leadership, I think those are two central challenges.
Interesting, interesting. We talk about the differences between the US and Europe, but this really reminds me of the similarities. If you go to the RNC or the DNC, the National Committee for the Republicans and the Democrats, obviously they're going to have, staffers galore, lots of tech, lots of people who know how to use it, know how to wield it properly. But as you go down, right, as you lower yourself into the state, often the state party or the county parties, in each of our states, there's 50 states, and in each of those states, there's somewhere between 12 and 120 counties. And each of those counties has their own political party. And they are missing people. I would go so far as to say that I would be surprised if a single county in the United States had every single one of their committeemen filled for both parties. That would be wild to me. And in these small organizations, they have the filthiest data of their own members. It's a real struggle when I go and consult with one of these county parties to revitalize what they're doing. First thing we do is start to take a look at their database, and
Mm.
it is years old. It is filthy. They are not keeping in touch with their donors or with their members. It's a really big hurdle. So if you were talking to one of these, if you were consulted by one of these small parties, your favorite small party in your home country, what would you tell them? What would be the first thing you would do to help them revitalize their data, their tech, etc.?
Organizations often think they're very, very exceptional, and and of course, it doesn't make sense to have Salesforce in a 4% party. It might, but it probably won't, right? But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that all your particular challenges and so on are really unique.
Mm.
And often those in-house built solutions are not up to the task, and even if they are at a particular point, they often don't get developed any further because of course it costs money and you need to stay on it, and then
Yeah.
people change. So that's, I think, one thing. And I'm back to the tools, and I said before, tools alone don't solve the problem. But of course, tools are still important, right? And and
Yeah.
and I would really, particularly the smaller parties, challenge on that point whether it makes sense to have their own CRM that has been developed by this obscure IT specialist, and really fits everything that we do, but then doesn't work after like a year or two and is really bad in terms of usability. Often the other thing is, of course, this getting it into the muscle. I mean, of course, people have to see that there's a benefit if they, I don't know, record all the attendees of a particular event as an organizer, and people need to understand, need to see that they can actually gain from that they can do the job better, that it makes the job easier, that it makes them more efficient. And there need to be some kind of key performance indicators or objectives and key results that need to be achieved. So there needs to be accountability, there needs to be transparency. I mean,
Mm.
those are, organization leadership 101, but still, I think those are the dimensions where political organizations often fail.
I talk to candidates on my side of, well, I guess not my side anymore. I talk to a lot of U.S. candidates and I ask them to see their campaign plan. Do you have one? They say yes. I say, where, let me see it. And they're like, oh, well, it's all up here. Um, and it's a lot of this. It's, a harebrained idea. Maybe they engaged some firm who said they would build them a tool or a custom app and it would work better at half the price, but then it never works properly. Um, and I think you definitely have it there and really moving in one direction as an organization. Is there anything else that you want to share about the tech conference?
I think, when it comes to the political tech summit, what
Yeah.
was really heartening was to see that there, a community came together that hadn't had the opportunity before to come together. And it's different from the GovTech crowd, the people digitizing government, and it's also different from a civic tech crowd, people who are empowering citizens with technological tools.
Yeah.
I think all of those are important, but political
But
tech,
campaigning is a different animal.
Exactly. Campaigning is not just done by parties. It's being done by
Yeah.
advocacy organizations, by union associations, even by businesses who are engaged
Yeah.
in the political arena. So those people coming together, those professionals, and really kind of talking about the nuts and bolts, I think to me was reaffirming that we're onto something here, because
Mm.
there's of course so much negative talk about technology at the moment, and at the same time, I think there's so much positive to be done. Times are changing, and I think there's so much happening. There's so many startups now emerging in Europe, with all the problems that you mentioned before, with too little money, but stuff is happening, and so I find it's a very, very exciting time for
Mm.
founding or for scaling solutions here, and for finding new clients across Europe and across political families. So this is
Mm.
why I'm really quite optimistic that we have a great future ahead of us.
And so is there, in the US, obviously there's a big startup scene. Both of the parties have their own incubators to really get political tech off the ground and running. Um, is there something like that in the EU or in one of the member states that you've seen?
In short, there's no such infrastructure yet.
Mm.
That said, that was also one of the discussions at the Political Tech Summit, that people said, well, why isn't there actually a fund for political tech? And now there are talks, also thanks to the summit. So I think that there will be stuff happening. Nobody has an overview at the moment because it's still too fragmented, but it's
Mm.
coming together. So I think it's a very good time to engage. But it's still not, of course, easy.
So in a hypothetical world, you get hired to run a congressional or a maybe a larger state senate race in the U.S. What's the European style innovation that you would bring to a campaign like that? And maybe not you individually, but what are we missing? We rely so much on money and paid outreach that I think we overlook a lot of grassroots organizing. And when we say grassroots in the US, we mean poor, doesn't have the money to send mail, is really what grassroots means. Um, Either way, we're not stellar at that relational organizing. Is there something that you think Europe does a lot better than the US?
I think, yes, what you pointed out to, that money isn't everything, right? I mean, the Dems had more money than the Republicans, and the Dems, I would argue, had the better tools than Republicans digitally, and still they lost the election, right? So
Yeah,
so despite all, of course, money being important, the tools being important, you still can fail ultimately, and
of
I think
course.
that this points probably towards the even more important strategy. How do you connect with people in person? And what I spoke about when it comes to the left, for example, in Germany, who somehow managed to tap into the anger and the fury, but then channeled that towards, of course, their own political interests. I think there's something to be learned from that. I think there is a notion that it's not enough just to be happy and be great about everything, and we have such a fantastic future ahead of us, right? If people don't feel it, this is, I think, if you will, the step before the money, and the step before the tools, is kind of, so what are we actually looking at here? Who are we talking to? What and I think perhaps not all of that is in the data.
Mm.
I guess many experts would say you can see everything in the data, but there's still some gut, I think, a component in all of this, in campaigning, right? I'm not sure this is European. I think this is basically political
Yeah,
strategy 101.
no,
Um,
definitely.
but
And
but
that's
this, yeah,
I think, we talk a lot about political science, but I think there's a real reason that this podcast is called "The Art of Campaigning" and not the science thereof, right? It's definitely a little up in the air, and I don't know that there's been a campaign that I've worked on where I haven't lied to myself a little bit about how well we were going to do. It's really hard not to believe in the chances of something that you believe in. the merit of?
I think that's beautifully said. I mean, I've been in campaigns, right? I've helped build a party, and I've lied to myself just as others did, right? I mean, this is
Yeah.
what you have consultants for, of course, often to pop
Hopefully
the
give you
bubble.
that gut check
Yeah,
to,
to give you that exactly to or to punch you in the face, not literally, but with data, and so yeah, I agree. I mean, this is the nature of politics.
mm,
So what we see is a need for more connection between the political class and the citizenry, more connection among the citizens, but also more connection among political pros. There's so much to
idea
be learned.
sharing and stuff like this. Okay.
Exactly, idea sharing, practice sharing. So this is why we founded Partisan, and of course the Political Tech Summit as one of our flagship events. And there's more to come in 2026. I can promise you. But this is why we did it, because we believe in the power of connection. We believe in the power of getting together, sharing stories, sharing experiences with tools, also getting vendors and clients in one room across the political spectrum, across countries, and really learn from each other. Of course, because Europe is such a place with different democracies, with different people. Of course, you cannot copy paste easily, but there are so many things that can be transferred from one story to another, from one place to another, from one election to another. And this is what we're here to do. We see that there's a market emerging,
Mm.
so we see an opportunity for impact, but we also see the opportunity for a business model that is sustainable and that works. And so we're very excited to develop this and scale this and see it grow in the coming years.
That's awesome. And so you said there's other events coming up. Is there anything exciting on the calendar for the rest of 2025 or 2026?
So for 2025, well, we almost every month we have a webinar. We just had very good webinars on Romania and Poland, and there are more elections coming up. I mean, we just saw that the Dutch government imploded, so there might be another election coming up there, and I'm sure we'll do a webinar on this, because of course Netherlands is also always an interesting place when it comes to digital and to innovations. Then of course in the autumn, in September, we will be presenting the first State of Political Tech report. And then in 2026, we are working right now on a second flagship conference after the Political Tech Summit. So stay tuned on that.
Okay. And if I want to learn more, if I want to sign up for Partisan, where do I go?
You go to Partisan.community. That is our URL, and you can sign up there for the newsletter for free. And then you get weekly updates, and of course also our invites to the various events, to the webinars, and so on. And even perhaps a goodie from one of our vendors every now and then.
Okay, awesome. Really nice having you on. And I hope my listeners learn something, not just about campaigning in the EU, but in the US, what they should be doing differently, because it really gave me a lot to think about.
Thanks, Caitlin. I had a great time. Thanks for the great questions. Thanks for having me.